Om Jnanatirmirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurinmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Okay, so we'll continue with discussion of points raised by someone who's supposed to be a Christian, although doesn't talk much about Christ or God, or talking more about development, refrigerators, TVs, cars, computers, etc. Okay, here he goes. Also, why did the Western world share their knowledge to the rest of the world? Should be with the rest of the world. They could have kept their knowledge like our Indian culture, where sharing of knowledge from one varna to another was prohibited. If one varna does a job, then growth in their fields will stop and pride and ego will go up. I don't exactly understand the last sentence, what it means. The Western world sharing their knowledge with the rest of the world. Now, it's true that the British introduced English language education with a Western education into India, although there was education prior to that. The reason for the British doing so has been recorded. It wasn't that they were thinking so much of the benefit of the Indian people, but they thought that this is documented, that even in the Parliament in England it was said that if we keep the Indians as Indians, then we can't control them or rule over them. We have to change their mentality. So that is possible by introducing Western-style education. And along with that was introduced the idea that everything Western is better. One, was it Lord Macaulay, who was noted as saying that one shelf of any library in the Western world is worth more than all the books that have ever been produced in India put together. So it's a very ethnocentric, egoistic, jingoistic, if you don't know what all these words mean, you can look them up, outlook that we are better and you should be controlled by us for your own good. That was the message, which this Indian priest, he's a very good disciple of the continuing idea. Even though the British have left, Indian independence was superficially achieved in 1947, but psychologically the Westerners are still controlling, or rather the Indians have become more like Westerners themselves with these ideas. That it wasn't for the benefit of the people is clear from certain things, just like, for instance, the cotton mills were being developed in Manchester and in Lancashire in general, which is part of England. And the cotton had to be imported. But already in India there was a whole culture going back since time immemorial of weaving cotton. Especially the East Bengal weavers, they were very expert. They made muslin, very thin and fine. So that the British factories could prosper, so that the cotton could be taken from India to Britain, woven in the factories there, and sent back to India and sold here. It's all for business. The British, they cut the thumbs off all the weavers. so that their art was lost. And so it was a hardly benign government. And even at home, you're talking about all the benefits. The reason they could sell cotton so cheaply, or their cotton goods relatively cheaply, was because the workers in the factories were they lived worse than pigs. Their living conditions were horrible. And in fact, that's inevitable in the industrial development. The progress, we use the word progress, or we could say the chronological development of industrial so-called development. It's just economic fact that goods are produced, you have to sell them to people, so the workers have to be paid enough so they can buy things. Then you export this to other countries. But then gradually the workers in the countries which are developed, they get more and more, they want more and more money. And so the economic development, it goes to now it's going to India and China because they have a large pool of, they can pay people less. And just like this city, Bangalore, is developing with so many big buildings, but India's present economic development, one of the factors, the construction industry, which is obviously a major part of it, infrastructure is required, roads, railways, houses, offices. That's going on by exploiting and paying next to nothing the workers, the manual laborers. So it's a culture of exploitation, which what happens is, there are so many factors. What happens is that the countries, they get more developed and people get more so-called prosperity, so they can buy more things like toilet paper and toothpaste and all these things which people never had before. Great benefit to human society. Of course, you can brush your teeth with a neem twig also. You don't need toothpaste. Then what happens is the people, they don't want to do jobs like cleaning toilets and manual labor, so they import people to do that. So like now in Europe, there's a large population of Muslims from North Africa Muslims in France, and Turks in Germany, and it just changes the whole demographic situation. Anyway, I'm just making the point, there's so many consequences of this following the Industrial Revolution, and there's so many consequences. The whole society gets upset in so many ways. Yeah, but anyway, this idea that the Western world shared their knowledge with the Western world, with the rest of the world, they didn't share it in a benign way, thinking that, well, we're going to help everyone, but they wanted to exploit. They built railways not for the benefit of the Indian people, but so that to help them better control and exploit the country. I mean, the British, the Dutch, the French, the Portuguese, and then the Mughals, they all came to this country. Why? Because it was very rich. Otherwise, why did they bother coming here such a long distance? For the sake of wealth. The people who came here they came here was headed by economic desires, and the missionaries followed. Although the traders and the missionaries didn't always get on so well, because the traders, they weren't, they just wanted to make money, that's all. They weren't so interested in all. They thought the missionaries would cause social problems, which they did and are still doing. Sharing of knowledge from one varna to another was prohibited. Prohibited, yeah, but again, why people were educated according to need. Why would someone who has to administer the state be trained in how to make pots? And why would a potter be trained in administration? It's a different system of education. From an early age, people are trained in a profession, so that as they grow up, they're in a profession. It's not that you go through school and you learn about so many irrelevant things, and then later you have to think what your profession will be. And then also, even if you get educated in a certain line, it's not necessarily that you'll work in that line, or that you'll even get a job in that line. As one of my brothers-in-law in England, after leaving school, he spent 5 years as a printer's apprentice. And at that time, the whole technology changed. Everything became computerized, and everything he learned became completely useless. So he spent 5 years working come studying, getting paid next to nothing, and all that he learned became useless, just irrelevant. So that's another problem with the so-called developed society, that it's very unstable. The economy is unstable, especially in the modern age. It depends on oil, and the oil's running out, and to get the oil you have to go and invade different countries. And because it's always changing, then people just, all of a sudden, people can just be out of a job. So this priest is talking about we all dream of our dream of the Western world. It was called the American dream, but it's turned into a nightmare in many ways for many people. But still people are dreaming. Still people are dreaming of happiness by getting money and so on. But you go to America, you'll find you go in the cities, there's so many beggars. I think I see more beggars in America than anywhere, actually. Of course, you see them everywhere, in England, but I think probably in America, maybe you just notice them there more, I don't know. But so many people, they're just, they have no job, no family, no anything. So it's a fact that the Western world is not only facing an economic crisis, but it's a moral and spiritual crisis with so much instability in society, in family values, and no family values. What family values? Most children in America are born out of wedlock, and those who are born in wedlock, they're usually, that means that with their father and mother are married, usually, but even if they are married, the chances of them remaining married very long are not very high. And so many problems, massive drug abuse, even within the White House. It was discovered some years ago. There was a drug trading was going on, and people selling marijuana just to the workers in the White House. And the mayor of Washington, D.C. some years ago was convicted for selling drugs. And so the West is facing a moral and spiritual crisis, but most people they just go along with it. There are many educated, intelligent people, but their education and intelligence is just engaged in the same old thing, like how to make more weapons, bigger weapons, better weapons. A huge amount of the economies of the world is spent on what they euphemistically call defense, which means how to make more sophisticated systems for killing people. So most of the people of the world are engaged as lawyers or scientists or educationalists, educating people how to become part of this decrepit system. And very few thoughtful people are actually trying to look for some alternative. They just go on in the same old way. But out of their own choice, but those who are looking for solutions, they're not looking for it in Christianity. There are very few people who are actually thoughtful and objective in the Western world, examining the problems and thinking that Christianity is the solution. Although there's a massive amorphous, you could say, or not like official movement of people who are taking inspiration from Eastern worldviews. Meditation is very common in the West. Yoga, vegetarianism is very common. That didn't come about due to Christianity, for sure. So without any governmental support or any one official movement to do so, many people are looking to what they consider to be Eastern wisdom to, at least in their personal lives, make some sense out of it. Then the priest goes on to speak about the ambassador car from HM, why the company could not flourish. Why can't you learn to use English properly? Why could the company not flourish? Why the company could not flourish? They were anyway, it's just part of being in India. I have to tolerate the Indian English. They were monopoly and never respected the customers. Poor product quality, unimproved design, customer dissatisfaction, and a lot more. So ambassador cars are being used as an example about why you should be a Christian. I guess the ambassador car was a part of a mixture of the old culture and the new culture, with the protectionism of the old Congress protectionist policies, with the idea that, well, we have a car and it works, so why bother changing it? The idea in the old traditional culture that whatever is old is whatever works and goes on, it's okay. You don't have to bother. It's the modern culture, the idea you always have to invent something new and develop and improve. But the old Indian culture was, well, if it's okay, go along with it. So it's like a mixture of the old and new cultures. I'm not going to try and argue the point that ambassador cars is India's greatest gift to the world. It's rather irrelevant. Although interesting, that's that term I was trying to remember in that one lecture in Mysore, planned obsolescence. That all these products that we buy, or I don't buy them, some people buy, cars, computers, iPods, they could be built to last more or less forever. But they're built so that they break just after the guarantee period. They're deliberately built like that so that you have to buy a new one. And in this way the company goes on selling more and more. Otherwise, if 60 years ago, they had cars which could last for a lifetime. They could build such things, but they deliberately don't, because then they wouldn't have much business. If you build a car that lasts for a lifetime, then you're going to sell less cars. So they build you a car which lasts for a few years. then their business is always going on, and they're always advertising new, better, improved. So that you think, I have to get the new one, I have to get the better one. And in fact, of course in car technology there's not much new coming up these days. But in computers there are always new softwares, new hardware, and then you need new hardwares, and you get more and more RAM and bigger. What's it now after gigabyte? Was it terabytes? Is it? What's the next one? Terabytes. But you need to always update. Just get a new computer because the old ones don't keep up with the new technology. But from what we've heard, they already have all the technology for years in advance already developed, but they only release it little by little because it's a business. That's all. As is written on the American dollar, in God we trust. But people are more interested in the dollar than in God. And that we can see. So this idea that the Western world is benignly benefiting everyone, it's cheating and exploitation. And some people are so foolish. Actually, most of the people in the world are so foolish that they just go along with it. And if someone wants to cut out of it, like Jesus did at that time, he cut out of materialistic society. Or like we are supposed to be doing at the present time. Well, I can say I am. Yeah, I am. Maybe that many members of the Krishna consciousness movement are just trying to make a compromise with modern materialistic society, but I don't want to. Compromise to some extent is there, just like we're using these electric lights, for instance. But we're making communities in which there are no electric lights. Living on God's bounty. Why then are we using this at all? Well, it's just like using the wood from a tree to make a handle for an axe to cut down a tree. We're not enamored by all these technological developments. But we use them to propagate to others that this is not necessary. That's all. So, if you go back to the Varna system, then your child can't go to what else did I have to say about this? Oh yeah, there's another point. If the British were so benign, then why did Gandhi and others oppose them? Why did they kick the British out if the British were so much concerned about doing such a good job for India? If you go back to the Varna system, then your child can't go to school. Well, this idea that everyone should go to school, that's another cheating, because they just prepare you for a life of slavery within a materialistic system. Your child, I guess, only the Brahmins and the elite groups will study, and the rest will be pushed to poverty and suffering as it happened before. Yeah, this is a very one-sided view. Just like poverty, this point about poverty. Our Murari Prabhu is in Malawi, which is rated among, I think, the 3 poorest countries in the world. The per capita income is one of the lowest in the world, but, as he told me, everyone in the country has a little land, and they grow their own food, and they don't have money, but they have food and a place to live, which many people in the Western world don't have. They may have money, but they don't have a place to live. And if you have your own, because they're not so much in the money economy, they're just producing their own food, then people think they're very poor. But actually they eat better than many people in the Western world who eat some food which is some vegetable which was grown with chemicals and was grown in another country and imported and is still looking somewhat fresh because it has artificial preservatives, has very little flavor, has very little nutrition, and is poisonous also because of the pesticides and the other chemicals put on it. So actually in Malawi, people, although they're rated to be very poor, but actually they have good and better food than most people in the Western world. And they're only rated as poor because there's this idea that you have to have money. Why do you have money? You have to have money so you can buy food. Well, they don't need to buy food because they grow their own food. Yam people grow that. It's their staple food. So you don't need grains produced in massive fields with massive combine harvesters and spraying the fields with pesticides from the air. You don't need all this. It's a much more simple way of life. So this idea, everyone has to go to school. This was promoted because the industrial society requires people who are competent to use all their machines and computers and technology. Although many people in the West nowadays are not that well educated anyway, as is being noted by the professors in the modern age are lamenting that people are coming into the university with language skills which they wouldn't have been allowed into they should never have been allowed in the university in the first place. Their English is terrible. And I've personally seen a paper someone showed me for he was working on a master's degree, and his standard, this in a university in America, his standard of English was terrible. But the professor just had to accept it because that's just normal nowadays. If they reject him for his English being so bad, then the professor himself won't have a job. He has to teach people who are very poorly educated. So this idea, everyone has to go to school, that's another myth that's propagated. Why? Why does everyone have to go to school? What's the value? If you're going to drive an auto rickshaw in Bangalore, then what do you need to go to school for? Why spend years in a school to drive an auto rickshaw? Well, you're going to have a better chance to do something else, but most people don't. There are many people who work in factories, work in fields, drive auto rickshaws, do many things. They don't need a formal education. A goldsmith, he teaches his son how to do the work, and his son learns it. And he has a profession for life. What does he need to go to school for? It's just a big myth that everyone has to go to school. Rather, what happens is from childhood, kids are forced to study, and they spend years studying. The other day, when I came here, I saw there's a girl in the house opposite, studying early in the morning, reading her book and falling asleep. It looked like she'd been up all night studying. Just some torture. And she's just tortured. And then when you get your university degree, then you spend your whole life just doing some jobs that you don't. Most people, if they have a job, most people in the modern world, if they have a job at all, they're doing something that they don't want to do, they don't like to do, they're not happy doing it, with people who they don't like, and they don't even like their family members. They come home and if they have a family at all. So more and more people just live on the internet, and they invent some persona for themselves and pretend to be some kind of person, and they write all kinds of heavy things, although they wouldn't dare to say such things to people personally. They just invent some persona. It's just an insane society which this person is trying to promote as being you should become a Christian because Westerners are Christians. It's an inane, insane argument, because most Westerners nowadays aren't Christians anyway. And it wasn't because of Christianity that this society developed. And this whole society is a mess anyway. Okay, finally, Although it's not finally, he's still got 3 paras to go, but he says, finally God made all of us equal. There is none big or small, powerful or powerless. Everyone is given a chance by God to know Him and to acknowledge Him. He loves people so much to those who acknowledge Him. He forgives all their mistakes and gives them the assurance of His love and place in heaven right in this birth so that they don't suffer. Also to them He will show the wonders of His knowledge and help them to develop this world with new thoughts and technology. God made us all equal. Well, if you say He made us, if you're talking about the material bodies that we have, that's obviously not true. Some people are tall, some are short, some are fat, some are thin, some are healthy constitutions, some have unhealthy constitutions. Some people are born in rich families, some people are born in poor families, some people are born mentally retarded. Mozart was born with the ability to play any instrument and compose practically from birth. So to say that all are equal, spiritually we're all equal. But materially there are great differences. And the Abrahamic religions can't explain that. If God loves us all equally, then why did He make some people healthy and some people unhealthy? That is explained by karma. But there's no such explanation in the Abrahamic religions. So, the priest says, everyone is given a chance by God to know Him and to acknowledge Him. Well, according to your doctrine, old Christianity is the only way. And whichever church you happen to be in, that church is the only way. Every church is saying our church is the only way, although some of them get together and they try and unite and all this kind of thing. So, if you say that it's only through Jesus, then what about all the people born before Jesus? What about people born in countries or places where people never heard of Jesus, even today, or countries where they have a different religious system? They won't be so much inclined to that. Some people, although born in a Western country, are born in a family or a non-family, or just to their mother, or they never knew their father, or born in a family or whatever of atheists or agnostics or people who just have no interest whatsoever in religion or Jesus. So how is it that everyone's equal? If you say that Jesus is the only way, why doesn't everyone get an equal chance to know about Jesus? It seems that God, according to their philosophy, it seems that God is biased. And if He's going to burn them in hell forever, if they don't acknowledge Jesus, then He's just setting some people up to be burned in hell forever. Because from the beginning, they have no interest in or knowledge of Jesus. In other words, their whole philosophy is absurd. Then He loves people so much to those who acknowledge Him. Yeah, He only loves those who acknowledge Him. He forgives all their mistakes. But what about the people who don't acknowledge Him? If God is really loving, then it's not just the ones who support Him, who wave His flag and say, Jai Jesus, but those who don't acknowledge Him, He also loves them. And according to the priest, to those who acknowledge Jesus, He gives them the knowledge to help them develop this world with new thoughts and technology. That's completely against the teachings of Jesus Himself. Jesus never spoke about develop the economy, try to make this world a wonderful place. He never spoke such things. Jesus was, as any typical spiritually minded person, Jesus wasn't interested in the economic development or trying to enjoy this world. That's more like Satan's philosophy, if you believe in Satan. I'm not here to hurt your feelings, he says again. I'm telling the direction the world goes. If you try to stop this flow, people will think you're a stumbling block and will ignore you. I will not. But Jesus went against the flow. Any genuine spiritualist doesn't go with the flow of the world because the flow of the world is materialistic. So, now the priest... So, I'm making the point that he's trying to represent Jesus, but he's not at all, this priest. Then, quoting Srila Prabhupada, throughout the entire world there are so many states, legislative assemblies and parliaments, but still the citizens are rogues and thieves. Then the priest comments, this above statement is very aggressive. True. True, yes, it's aggressive. Jesus also, if you see the history, if we're to believe what's in the Bible, then he also sometimes became very aggressive at materialistic people. According to your philosophy, God condemns people to fall into hell forever. That's really aggressive and nasty. And a premature idea about this world without a holistic wisdom of a knowledge about each situation is just a general statement. Yes, it's a general statement. It's not saying that everyone's a rogue and a thief, but it says that the entire statement has to be seen in context. It's saying that despite the efforts of various legislative bodies, that there's so much crime in the world. As was seen in New Orleans when the administration broke down, when the whole city got flooded, and then people were just... Or when the police go on strike in the Western world, sometimes it happens. I think recently from Canada, the police went on strike. Immediately, people were out in the streets looting and robbing. So, the point Prabhupada is making, if you read this statement in context, is that people, just by making laws, you can't improve the quality of life or make people good citizens. You have to train them to be good citizens by giving them proper moral education. It is very abusive and the words are improper for a spiritual person. This just shows his desperateness to push his view. What do you mean by a spiritual person? This point should be discussed. What do you mean by spiritual? According to your definition, it seems like spiritual means who's got the most technological development. That's what in your letter you've been talking about all the time. Does it mean someone who just smiles at others or what? What do you mean by spiritual? I mean, the priest seems to have no idea of or actual interest in anything spiritual. He's just talking about technological development. He's more a proponent of Western technological development than anything Jesus said. His whole letter, there's nothing about the teachings of Jesus or how we... I mean, Jesus said many good things, although Christianity doesn't, on the whole, it doesn't have a very... or to use that word holistic, doesn't have a very clear understanding of God and our relationship with Him. Here's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, one of the things he said about Christianity. What crime did the living entities commit? Unable to properly answer this question, some men of small intelligence gave birth to a very wild idea. God created the first man and placed him in a pleasant garden with his wife. Then God forbade the man to taste the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Following the evil counsel of a wicked being, the first man and woman tasted the fruit of the tree of knowledge, thus disobeying God's command. In this way they fell from that garden into the material world filled with sufferings. Because of their offense, all other living entities are offenders from the moment of their birth. Not seeing any other way to remove this offense, God Himself took birth in a human-like form, took on His own shoulders the sins of His followers, and then died. All who follow Him easily attain liberation, and all who do not follow Him fall into an eternal hell. In this way, God assumes a human-like form, punishes Himself, and thus liberates the living entities. An intelligent person cannot cannot make sense of any of this. Yeah, it's a very poor theology. I mean, if we're actually to be objective, we have to see that it's a very poor theology. There are so many questions and answers unanswered. So the priest has made various allegations, and in a general, not a systematic way, I've answered just to show that, as I say, in a general, not a very systematic way, that all these objections that are given, they can be countered. And just as you are complaining about India and saying the West is better, but there are so many, that can be countered, and it can be shown that there are so many bad things in the Western world. Of course, there are many good things in the Western world also, many things that India can learn from the Western world. For instance, civic cleanliness, environmental and ecological consciousness, and so on. So I'm not an apologist for India or Hinduism. I'm not particularly interested to bash the Western world, but this presentation of the priest is just so lopsided and inaccurate that it's been said to me something should be said in reply, because he's attempting to lead people down the same path that he's going down, as he's convinced that it's the best. But an intelligent thinking person should consider very carefully what actually is the best, what actually is the purpose of life. Without considering that, if we simply engage in argumentation, then no one is benefited. In the Vedic science of argumentation, which was developed long before Christ, long before the Western world had its renaissance, it's said that there are three types of debate, disputation, or discussion between people of different standpoints. That which is in Sattva-gun, the mode of goodness, is called Vada, where there is a sober, impartial investigation and discussion of various issues to try to ascertain the truth. In Rajogun, the mode of passion, there is Jalpa, in which one person simply speaks, wanting to be heard by others and not being interested to hear others. And then in Tamagun, the mode of ignorance, there is Vitanda, in which one simply wants to win a debate at all costs without any concern for the truth. Just you have a point and you want to push it, and you can tell lies, you can avoid valid points that are presented to you. You just want to win. That's all. So I don't find in the priest's discussion or his points a sober, impartial investigation and discussion to try to ascertain the truth. He's already considered that God's, at least from his presentation, he's presenting that, well, the sign of God's grace is that he gives you industrial development, which if you just look a little below the surface, it's a very poor proposition. So anyway, you're trying to point out some faults. I pointed out some faults in the suppositions of the priest and in Christianity and in the whole idea of economic, industrial development, the Western world this man is a proponent of the Western world, not a proponent of... Somehow he's joined the two together and he conflated the two in his mind. Although they're definitely not exactly the same thing. So I can point out the faults in you, you can point out the faults in me, and this can go on forever. Although at the present time, due to various historical factors, the propaganda is against what might be called Hinduism. It's within India and outside, it's promoted as something very backward, and the not so much Christianity is being promoted by Christians, although in general all over the world this gross materialism is being promoted. A more objective analysis is required. I mean, of course there are and have been many bad things in Vedic culture, just like there have been many bad things in Christianity. That doesn't mean that Christ is bad. It doesn't mean that everything about Vedic culture is bad. The caste system is usually, that's the favorite one for beating India. That we admit that's been, it's not the original idea is not bad, but it has been misused. But that doesn't mean that the original culture is bad. At the higher levels of the culture, atato brahma jignasa, human life is meant for inquiry into spiritual reality, which is wholly missing in this priest presentation. Is just completely concerned with industrial development, and as if that's the highest goal of life. I don't find anything spiritual whatsoever in his presentation. And just to bash India's culture without seeing the spiritual wealth that it has to offer is extremely one-sided. Here's just for example, if we see the wisdom of Bhagavad Gita, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Doshanu Darshanam. One should see that there are miseries which no one in this world can avoid: birth, death, old age, and disease. This one should see this. This is knowledge. So this is not a sectarian belief, but a philosophical or an exposition of reality. Who can deny it? For instance, we find, so there's a long before Christ, there was a sophisticated system of theism. How can you deny that God has not manifested himself in the spiritual culture of India? Is it all just a big, just the work of Satan, some fanatics will say? What about these verses from Srimad Bhagavatam? Just consider the wealth and the depth of them. Kamasya nendriya priti labho jiveta yavata jivasya tattva jignasa narto yas cheha karma bihi. That one should not live one's life simply for fulfilling material desires, such as by getting fridges and computers and thinking that's the goal of life. But rather one should not live for the sake of fulfilling material desires. Rather, one's energy should be focused on, one's life should be focused on understanding the nature of reality. That alone should be the goal of all one's activities. Now, if you examine impartially from what we know of Jesus, his life was very much in tune with this statement, not with the statements of the priest who claims to represent Jesus. Then again, Savai pung sang paro dharmo yato bhakti radhokshaje ahaitukya pratihataya yatma suprasidati. The topmost dharma, which dharma is sometimes translated as religion. So the topmost religion, although the word dharma actually encompasses much more than the English word religion. So the topmost dharma is that by which one has devotion to the Supreme Lord, who is a transcendent being. That devotion should be unmotivated. One should not perform bhakti or devotion to God simply for what I can get. God will bless me with more and more money and so many. No, just the opposite. Don't just serve Him to love Him, that's all. Out of love for who He is. Not thinking what I can get from Him. He will give me more and more and more and more. The best God is the one who gives you more and more. But where is the love of God? And a pratihata, real love for God, means to be fully absorbed in it all the time. Not just you pay some lip service to God and then He gives you all kinds of facilities and you enjoy it and you say, thanks God. That's not bhakti. The very first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, Janmadhyasya yatonve aditaratas charteshvagnya swarat Tene brahma hridaya adi kaviye mohyanti yat suryaha Tejo vari mridang yata vinimayo yatra trisargo mrisha Dhamna svena sadani rastakuhakang satyang parandimahi. I'd like to read the translation. I can translate it word for word, but the translation is very nicely composed in excellent English. So rather than going through it bit by bit, I'll just read through the whole translation. Actually, this is one translation and there's so much more if you examine each word. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. O my Lord Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisance unto you. I meditate upon Lord Sri Krishna because He is the absolute truth and the primeval cause of all causes of the creation, sustenance and destruction of the manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, and He is independent because there is no other cause beyond Him. It is He only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By Him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion, as one is bewildered by the illusory representations of water seen in fire or land seen on water. Only because of Him do the material universes temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature appear factual, although they are unreal. I therefore meditate upon Him, Lord Sri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon Him, for He is the absolute truth. So can you not appreciate that there is, in a culture which long before Jesus' appearance produced such deep understanding or descriptions of God, the Supreme Being, and you just want to rubbish it all and just say ambassador motor cars are no good, therefore be a Christian. It's actually very, very disappointing coming from someone, from a trained theologian. This man is a priest. He's been trained for years. I would think at least 5 years they have to study. And that's all he can come up with? if you're actually serious to understand God, let us discuss. But simply saying ambassador cars are no good, and citing this as a reason why Christianity is supposed to be better, it's weak, it's superficial. Anyway, there are so many adjectives you could use, but anyway, I would request anyone who's actually serious to understand God to not simply accept some dogma. God has given us intelligence. It's a misuse of that intelligence simply to develop motor cars. The best use of that intelligence is to use that to search out the nature of Godhead. Of course, it cannot be found simply by intelligence. That's another mistake, to think that just by learning one can understand Him. Or ultimately, He is to be approached by love. But that's also an intelligent proposition to find out God. So there are many impressive people in Christian history all over the years, but although we don't see many nowadays, but there have been. In Russia, there were unknown millions maybe who were completely, very much absorbed in God and praying. Of course, they didn't have very clear understanding, but traditionally, before the culture was deliberately destroyed by communism, Russians were intensely religious people, Christian. So those who are actually spiritually minded, they will appreciate others who are, but they will not appreciate others who, in the name of spirituality, just want to shatter people's beliefs and replace it with another set of shallow beliefs. No doubt much of modern Hinduism is very shallow. The inability to see the shallowness of this presentation demonstrates that. Whoever got this and couldn't see through it obviously has never seriously tried to understand the nature of Godhead. But to try to vilify one set of shallow beliefs and replace them with another, that's got nothing to do with God's desire for this world. So, Hare Krishna. Let us all chant the names of God. That Srila Prabhupada, when he met Christians, he would often ask them, chant the names of God. You can chant the name of Jesus if you like. He wanted to engage them in some spiritual activities. All right, any question or comment about that? You have anything?
The seventh-day creation story and Adamic ideas are presented for creation, which is different from Vedic perspective on creation. What's the thing which Christianity or Bible is presenting here?
What is the Bible presenting about creation? The world was created actually not in 7 days, in 6 days. It was created, according to the Bible, Genesis, the world was created in 6 days, and God was tired and He took rest for 1 day. And on that 1 day, no one should do any work, according to the Bible. Actually, according to the Bible, if anyone does any work on the Sabbath, they should be killed. Not on the Sabbath. You have to wait till the next day to kill them. That's why the Jews, they like to keep non-Jewish servants because then the servants could do all the work on the Sabbath when they themselves couldn't cook or clean or do any such thing. The problem with that is that sometimes their Christian servants took their children and got their children baptized without the children knowing what was going on at all. And then once they were baptized, then that was it. They were considered finished. Now they're a Christian. It's a silly idea. You put some water on someone's head and say something and think, well, that's it. Now they're a Christian. The poor baby doesn't know what's going on. I've seen so many baptisms. I used to go as an altar boy. I used to see the baby, and the baby's screaming, and they're pouring some water. Now he's a Christian. Now he's saved from hell. And the baby has no idea what's going on. That's why I said in America there's a spate of unbaptizement. The people, they want to register themselves. That I want to nullify my time. It was done to me when I was a baby. I don't want to be. They've made some unbaptizement. They get some. I don't know what they do exactly, but they register themselves, or they make some statement that we're not baptized. So anyhow, what was that? There's 6 days, and then he rested, and then the Bhagavatam gives a version of creation also. So yeah, it's much more detailed actually, how the Supreme Lord creates this universe and destroys it again and again. Not that just God was sitting in heaven and then just all of a sudden he decided to create some material world, and then at some time he comes and judges everyone and throws most of them in hell, and then it's all over. But rather cyclic time. There's creation, maintenance, and destruction. It goes on in cycles. So what's the question?
Does that mean that
What's that? Adam and Eve? There was Adam, God created Adam, and then Adam got lonely or something, so God took a rib out of him, blew on it, and that created Eve. And then Eve got tempted by a snake, a talking snake, who tempted her to eat the fruit which they're not supposed to eat. And then Adam and Eve ate the fruit, so they got thrown out of the Garden of Eden, and as a result, all the problems in the world that we see now are because our forefather, way back, ate some fruit. Then there was Cain and Abel, and the first, there were the sons, and then Cain killed Abel. And then so it doesn't describe where the women came from. Maybe, I don't know, that was their mother, I don't know. But anyway, out of them came all the rest of the people in the world. So anyway, you can believe it if you like. It's not a very satisfying account of how the human race came into existence. I mean, satisfying means that there should be something that which syncs with our understanding or basic understanding of how things work in this world. Yeah, so what's the question? Something about creation? Yeah, there's a different account in the Bhagavatam.
Does that mean that wrong idea in Christianity because of
wrong ideas in Christianity? Well, there are various reasons. I mean, Christianity grew out of Judaism, which, after all, it wasn't a very developed spiritual culture. So, yeah, I mean, it's just like in the 1970s and 1980s, there was a lot of propaganda in America against cults, new religious cults, and that's still going on to some extent in Russia, what they call sects. Now they call it sects. And somehow they have the idea that because Christianity and Islam are very old and widespread, that they're bona fide religions. Whereas Krishna consciousness isn't, although actually it is very old and it does have many adherents also. But viewed objectively, if Christianity and Islam were to be introduced now, I mean the same criteria for which they say that these new sects are dangerous, they very strongly fit Christianity and Islam. They have the idea that you just have to, unless you follow this, you're doomed forever. And especially Islam has become infamous throughout the world for certain interpretations of Islam which, according to many, they are derived directly from the Quran, which recommend horrible violence toward others. And some people say, well, the Bhagavad Gita, it's a book of violence, but if we see the culture that came out of it is, I mean, we don't find in Vedic culture crusades, pogroms, holocausts, inquisitions. We don't find such things. On the whole, although there have been very heated and you could say acerbic philosophical exchanges, but it didn't usually come to in very few cases it come to the point where they'd actually kill each other or recommend killing each other because of religious or philosophical differences, which is very prominent in Christianity and Islam. So actually it's a fact that in Hinduism and Buddhism on the whole, they're far more tolerant than Christianity and Islam. Judaism, I don't know. It's a small religion, and anyway, like I say, if we get to examine, then you'll find faults here. Then everyone can promote each other's faults. But better than that is to find God wherever and however He manifests Himself. So on the whole, we'll find that the knowledge, the spiritual knowledge and the spiritual culture and the spiritual practice has been far more developed in India than in any other part of the world. That there are deviations and aberrations, that's admitted. But if we see objectively, then it is a very developed spiritual culture. So why the descriptions in the Bible are so simplistic? Well, I guess it was for very simple-minded people who they needed a very simple description. And a lot of it's grown out. It's not exactly scientific knowledge of reality, understood from a transcendental perspective. A lot of it is just folk tales, if we are to be realistic. Yeah.
Prabhupada said that even though people in Vedic culture, although they are worshippers of demigods, they are well situated.
Yeah, Srila Prabhupada said that worshippers of demigods in Vedic culture are better situated than those who worship one god in Christianity, because at least those in the Vedic culture, they are in the Vedic culture, that was Srila Prabhupada's understanding that he gave us, is that even to be in Vedic culture with an imperfect understanding is better to be in a non-Vedic culture in which people are superficially monotheistic, but they have no idea who is God, what He wants. So,
what would be the fact of, not that everyone who are not seriously interested in understanding the absolute truth goes to Christianity. Someone would approach with a genuine motive of understanding the absolute truth.
someone who approaches with a genuine motive of understanding the absolute truth, you're saying if they approach Christianity? Well, who are those people with a genuine motive? I mean, mostly people they have mixed desires. There are very few people who come to the level of actually genuinely inquiring about the absolute truth. Mostly people who approach God, they do so because they are arto jignaso artarti. They're distressed, they want wealth, or they may have some curiosity. People who are actually serious to understand God are very few. If they are serious to understand the nature of reality and they approach Christianity, then they're going to have to admit that there's some very serious problems with their presentation. Of course, the classical Christianity, the belief in Adam and Eve and all of that, that's been modified by many Christians in the modern age. But then, if you don't believe in all that as it is literally, then what is your Christianity anyway? Yeah, what I'm saying is that many modern people who claim to be Christians, they understand that the traditional theology and teachings of Christianity don't make much sense. So they modify them, or there's some that came in the newspapers less than a couple of years ago that some British bishops had said that much of the Bible is not to be understood literally. But then if you don't accept it literally, then what have you got? You've just got you're just left with your own speculations about what it should be. So, either you accept traditional Christianity as it is, if you want to be what's called a Christian, which doesn't necessarily mean a follower of Christ. Many years ago I heard the saying that the last Christian died on the cross. But if you do accept traditional Christianity, if you are seriously trying to understand God and you look at traditional Christianity, you'll see there are many problems with that. If you anyway just want to go and do it blindly, then I would say that you're not really not very seriously looking for the truth. Or if you say, well, we want to modify this and modify that, then again you're not looking for the truth. Because you've just latched onto Christianity and a priori accepted that this must be correct. If you're sincerely looking for the truth, then you should remain dissatisfied with what is there in Christianity. I would say so. If you're very serious to understand the nature of God. There's very little said about God in Christianity. I mean, they say Jesus is God, but he didn't say that himself, at least from what we have in the Bible. And if he did say, well, that again, why should we accept that? Especially if you're confronted with such a comprehensive theology as presented in Vaishnava understanding. If you're actually serious to understand God, understand that God, he doesn't just present himself to a few people, but he presents himself in various cultures throughout the world at various times, at different levels according to different people's ability to follow and understand. Then why not find out the best? In fact, we've heard many times that in Italy especially, when our devotees were distributing books, the priests and nuns were the most eager to read them. And this Madan Mohan in Moscow told me that he's met several monks who told him that, well, we're reading your books secretly because we know they're the best. We can't say it, but we know that this is real knowledge. Anyone who's serious about God, and many monks and nuns are, they must be. Not all of them are. I mean, I've seen in my childhood some of the monks and nuns, I guess they were from Irish families and they were pushed into it. Like my mother tried to push me into being a Christian priest. But I said no, I don't want to be one. So I avoided that. At a young age, what happens, they send them at a young age for training. And they just kind of get into it and they can't get out of it. But some of them are very serious. Oh, there's another thing I saw after Vatican II. There's so many nuns in the West who they started wearing short skirts. I guess most of them who started wearing short skirts, and they just gave up being nuns. Many gave it up during the 1970s. They gave up Christianity. So, what was the point? Yeah, those who are serious, they will appreciate what is the value in the books of Srila Prabhupada. It may be that if you're a Christian and you come across Hinduism, then you may see it as absurd. They often talk about the elephant-headed god. It's so stupid and all this. Although I met once on a flight from Dubai to Bombay, I was sitting next to a Christian disc jockey from Bombay who had gone to Dubai someone had called him for a party or something. And he told me, yeah, I always go to the temple of Ganesh in Bombay. So you may say, but then, I mean, if you start saying, you see so many silly things, elephant-headed God. Well, you have in the Bible that God became a burning bush. So, if you start to try to point out unusual things that you don't believe, then you can put it the other way also. And why can there not be a powerful being who does have the head of an elephant? Why not? You haven't seen one, doesn't you? What have you seen? Like a frog living in a well, what has he seen? What does he know? What do we know about the universe living on this tiny little planet? There may be so many things. One reason, again, when I was a kid, from a very early age, I understood that they're cheating us in the schools by not presenting everything about reality. Because one thing that I was very aware of at that time was ghosts and spirits. So the fact that all over the world there are, every culture speaks of ghosts. Don't talk too much about ghosts. Hare Krishna. But we're someone chanting Hare Krishna. So, but we're supposed to, according to modern ideas, there are no such things, just a figment of the imagination. Then how is it in all cultures of the world? It's there, and even in the modern age, there are modern ghosts also. Just like there was one plane crash, one plane going from America to somewhere in South America. Delta Airlines, I believe it was, or whatever. So this is in the modern world, on an airplane. So when they flew more planes on that route, it's a scheduled flight. Maybe it was, I can't remember what it was. Say Miami to Mexico City, whatever. It wasn't that. But so when the airline flew on that route again, the captain of the flight that had crashed kept on coming on that flight. In other words, his ghost kept on. He'd be sitting in the plane, making announcements over the PA system. And eventually the airline had to cancel that service, which was profitable, because none of their staff would go on that. They refused to go on those flights because the ghost kept on coming on it. So, I mean, there are so many things which I understood that in cultures all over the world they describe dragons. Are there no such things? That's what I thought when I was a kid. So I understood that this materialistic way of education, it's just trying to constrict our knowledge within the very narrow parameters of that which we can see. If you don't see it, don't believe it. That's a stupid idea. So anyway, there are so many things to be said. Can't say it all at once. Yeah, it's already what, 8:30? Is that the right time?
8:20.
Yeah, well, more or less. In India, you should know. 8:28 and 8:30, no difference.
Well, teaching this sometimes it's like these interreligious dialogues.
Interreligious dialogues.
Similarities,
yeah. The real question should be, what is the ultimate reality, and how can we understand? I've spoken about interreligious dialogues so many times. I have finished now. It's already 1.5 hours. You want to say something? One Russian devotee is an ex-Orthodox priest. Is that? Oh, he's still an Orthodox priest. Initiate devotee. Okay, good. Is there an original Bible? Well, what do you mean by the Bible? That's another question. That I spoke on the second day. There are different ancient books which some scholars at some point together, they got together and said, okay, these ones we accept, these ones we don't accept, this is the Bible. And then different groups, they have the different Bibles. You see, it's a very different thing to Vedic knowledge, which is Shruti. It's some writings that were written down at some point by we don't know who, although the first 5 books of the Bible are ascribed to Moses, although it seems very unlikely that Moses actually wrote them, or that one person actually wrote them. And anyway, I spoke about that the other day. Original Bible, what does that mean? There are printed Bibles in the... there may be still some of the early printed Bibles, which are translations. There may be some editions. But what's the value of that? The Vedic understanding of Scripture is very different to that of Christian understanding. Deeper subjects than we can discuss now. One time in India, one man, he said something to Prabhupada about the Bible and said, why you bring the Bible? Come on, you're here in India, we have the Shastra, so why even bring the Bible at all? In the West, Srila Prabhupada would quote that sometimes. Who is God? What is our relationship with Him? What does He look like? What does He do? What is the nature of God? They have no knowledge. Just like we're discussing this Vishnu Sahasranama in depth, trying to understand the nature of God. There's nothing there in the Christian tradition. There's no such thing. I must have sat through hundreds of lectures. Yeah, actually every day at school we had some religious, everyone was compelled to come to some religious teaching. And then in the church, but I don't think they ever talked about God. He didn't even use the word. It's all like about, social, In that time, there's a lot of talk about the blacks in America getting equal rights and all this kind of thing. Do good to others, help the poor. Mostly, give something to the church. Disappointingly unspiritual.